guys, it's Robin, RsIslandCrafts, and welcome to my craft room. We're going to learn a new embroidery stitch today for our little 6-inch in hoop embroidery project. I'll go ahead and put a link up in the iCard to the playlist, so if you need to go back to the very beginning and watch them all the way through, you can do that. That way we're not repeating a lot of stuff for the people that are following along. Today we're going to learn the lazy daisy stitch. Now the lazy daisy stitch can be used to do flowers, or it can be used to make those narrow leaves. On our project today, it has a stem that goes like this. You'll see it more when we get over there, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of an idea. And it has these narrow leaves that we're going to do our lazy daisy stitch on. The lazy daisy stitch, when you draw it out and some people, when they draw it out on their patterns, they draw it out completely like this. Since like I said before, I'm using the Friction pen that will go away with heat, so I go ahead and draw my entire petal out. And other times, this is basically meant to represent the same thing. They'll just put dots where you're going to tack down your lazy daisy stitch, so that in case your loops don't go exactly where you think they're going to go in your drawing here, you won't have any of that sticking out. I'm going to show you over here first. So you're going to pick one of your spots over here, and we're going to do this basic petal. We're going to pull all the way up. Once again, I have the knot on the back that we don't do. The last video will show you how to start a new thread. And I'm going to hold this thread all the way up here, my floss, and I'm going to go down on the second part at the base of my petal. Now when I'm pulling it through, I'm not going to pull it completely through. I'm going to leave this little bit of a loop here. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to come up to the center of that loop. You see where my needle's coming out? And then I'm going to slowly pull it through, and as I pull this through, it's going to go ahead and tighten up my loop. If I make it super tight, it's going to make a narrow loop. And if I just go gentle, I can decide where I want to stop with my loop. So if I just want to have maybe a flower petal versus a leaf, I can go ahead and stop it there. Sometimes you have to fiddle a little bit with it. Since I pulled it too tight already, we're just going to kind of end up with this type of a loop. I'll do it, the next loop I make, it'll be the more of a rounded one. And then when we're going to go back down, what we want to do is we want to have this loop, so we're coming up on the inside. We want to put our needle down on the outside, directly next to where we came up in that center of that loop. And this is just going to go ahead and tack down. See where it just go ahead and it just tacks down that stitch. Now this doesn't have to be super tight. It can go ahead and be a little bit loosey-goosey here. You don't have to have it super tight against your fabric. After you tack it down, you can still kind of loosen it up a little and spread it out. And then I'm going to go over and do my next one, and I'm going to go next to the last one where I did that. Now this time I'm going to keep my loop a little bit rounded, and I'm not going to pull it super tight. So I leave my loop a little bit. And even if my loop falls out of the way, I know where I'm going to be putting my needle. Then I can just take my loop and put it back over my needle, because sometimes it does come out. Then as I pull my needle through, I can go slow and gentle. And when I feel a little resistance, then I'll just pull it to the point that I want it to be. So if I want it to be a little bit rounded, just slide my thread over a little bit. And then I'm going down. My needle first had come up on the inside of the loop. Now I'm going down on the outside so I can tack that loop down. And then I have more of a rounded. Now if you see like, okay, well maybe this one's sticking up a little bit too much, just go ahead and pull your little tacking stitch up a little. You go ahead and tighten it just a little bit more. When we first come up like this, how far we put our distance between that hole and where we put our needle down will also determine how wide this can be. If we go down really close to that last one, then we're going to go ahead and get more of a pointed leaf or flower petal, depending on what you're making. And that's going to make my petal narrower. And it'll be more like that. See the difference? Now when you have it where you just mark the dot's going to represent where your tacking stitch is going to be. So I'm going to pull my floss up through, hold it out of the way, and when I come back down, I'm going to put my needle up through that little dot. And that's just going to show where my tacking stitch is, and it lets me know how tall my leaf or my petal is going to be. So I can make it nice and narrow like that. And then I'm going down on the outside of it so that it tacks it down. Got enough floss here to show you one more, and then we will go over and do it on our actual project. See, a lot of times my loop just flops over, especially when I have a short amount of floss to work with. It's kind of hard to hold it sometimes. Just pull my petal. Sometimes you've got to, if your floss gets out of, like it's not laying down nice and neat next to each other, you can just fluff it up a little. Then you see where I'm going to go down on the outside, right next to where I came up. And that holds it down. And that's the Lazy Daisy. So let's go over to our real project and work on that one. Now for our design, we're going to go ahead and work on this section today. Now it shows that we have our stem stitch. Now remember, we always do our stem stitch with 3 strands. But the Lazy Daisy calls for 6 strands. I decided that I'm going to do mine in the same color floss still, the stem and all the leaves. So I went ahead and I did with the 3 strands, I did my whole stem stitch. And now I've go ahead, fastened it off, and I've started a new group of thread with the 6 strands so that I can go ahead through and do my Lazy Daisy stitches. Now these are just going to be really narrow leaves. So when you first come out with your stitch, and then when you go back down at the end of your leaf, you're probably only going to be a thread or 2 away from each other. So they're going to be really narrow. I'm going to try to stay where I drew the pattern on, where I traced a pattern on, I should say. But like I said, if I go off of it a little bit, it'll be okay. Now I want to make sure that it didn't get twisted at all, so I'll just hold this over here out of the way. Go up through. Then I'll just slowly pull it through till I get that leaf. And then I'm going to go down on the outside of my loop, and that will tack it down. And we've gone ahead and made a Lazy Daisy stitch. Not difficult at all. And now we're just going to repeat that 9 more times. Sometimes your floss just wants to twist in on itself. I go slow, firmly fixed. Sometimes they get, like I said, all the 6 strands sometimes want to just get out of alignment. I'm not too worried about these little leaves and the loops. Like this one is sticking up just a little bit and it's not laying flat compared to the other ones. But it's going to be a leaf, and that's going to give it just a little bit of dimension that I'm not going to really be able to make on my own. Just putting floss on top of a piece of fabric. So I'll let that be a little flipsy flopsy there. When I first started learning embroidery, I loved the lazy daisy stitch. If I doodle, sometimes I doodle geometrically, but I really like to doodle in loops. So the lazy daisy being a loop, a stubborn loop, it's just something that I like. I kind of like a lot of the stitches. I just like to embroider in general. But I just remember doing the lazy daisy many years ago, like Girl Scout times. I think with almost any of the embroidery stitches, you can kind of get a nice little rhythm going, even if your thread gets knotted behind your canvas. That's why I find it very, very relaxing and, like they say, zen-like. Put on an audiobook. It's very relaxing. Now this one's a little small, so my loop it's quite tiny, and it's okay even if the two legs of the loop are touching. These are pretty close. This one's pretty narrow also, so it's going to be really tight, and it's just going to resemble a leaf. Because when you look at a plant, not all the leaves are the same size, nor do they all look the same. It'd be kind of boring if everything looked the same. Speaking of leaves, I've been enjoying seeing a lot of different videos and pictures with everyone's fall leaves. I know a lot of people are getting snow, but with the colors of the leaves, they're so bright and beautiful. I know I've mentioned it many times before, but our leaves down here in Florida are green. They may have leaves that change color up north in northern Florida, but I'm way past the, I'm more in the southern part of it, past the halfway part, so we have a lot of greens. But there's many different shades of those greens, so you still have something different to look at on each plant. So just slide that around a little, make sure it's nice and even. This one looks to be like I need to tighten up the loop a little. Just loosen up my little tacking stitch. Since it's hard to get it, I put my needle underneath the loop, and that pulls my tacking stitch right up, and then I can put my needle in and loop it. And if I give that a little bit of a tug while holding on to the top of the stitch, it straightens out my loop beautifully, and then I can go ahead and tack it back down. I haven't embroidered enough and been creative enough to know if this stitch, the lazy daisy, can be used on anything but flowers and leaves. I'm sure you can use it in a fun border design. It doesn't have to be just in some type of a flower or plant. Just one more left. Now this is going to be the only stitch I'm going to show you today, because within this one plant, leaf, stem, flower thing, I think it's like a fern or something, we only have this one stitch to do. We've already learned a stem stitch, so we're ahead of the game there. So while you're learning the new lazy daisy, while you're learning the new lazy daisy, you can also be practicing your stem stitch. Now I'm going to hold this loop out of the way this time. Put my needle up through, and as I'm pulling it through, I'll just pop it through that loop, whichever works for you. And that's it. Then I just have to finish it off. So now on our original design, we just finished this area here. Now this basically, at the bottom of this, we're going to put a bunch of French knots in here. But you have the stem stitch and you have lazy daisies. So anywhere you see a straight line, you've got a stem stitch. And then anytime you see these little loops, it has lazy daisy. So now if you like, here's another identical one here. If you want to stitch one that looks just like it, you could pop over up to this part of the heart and stitch that. See, there's more over here. There's a lot of practicing on here for the lazy daisy. So if you want to go through and go ahead and stitch all of these right now, and then you'll be ahead of the game before we get to the next week. Or you can just leave them and just learn one at a time, and then you can come back later and do it. Now we're going to do another lazy daisy here, but this is more like that flower like I showed you, where we're all going to go into the center of it. I haven't decided yet, but I might go ahead and do all the ones that look just like this and fill these in, so you'll see them on my finished project the next time we get together. But I might leave the ones like this that are part of an actual another flower design. So if I have time, we can go back through and do a little practice together, and we can do whatever the stitches are, like the stem stitch and the lazy daisy. And we could do a little practice on that before we get to this. This one is going to be full of French knots. I believe that's like a lilac that looks like that. But there's another larger flower here, so you have a lot of places to practice your lazy daisy. So that's it for me today. Thank you guys for hanging out with me and learning some embroidery stitches, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!